Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. You are not a saint. Someone else's hand on her waist. That's the first image burned into my mind when everything started sliding off its axis. I remember the way the neon from the bar sign outside lit up her hair like a halo, the dull hum of passing cars overshadowed by my own pulse as I stood there, hidden behind the tinted glass door. I didn't know who the guy was at first. All I knew was that he had his fingers splayed across her hip as if it belonged to him, as if he had every right to touch her like that. I pushed the door open, the jingle of the bell overhead too soft, too ordinary for a moment like this. She pulled away from him just enough to smooth her blouse, but her body language told me everything. She wasn't startled, wasn't offended. She looked at me, parted her lips slightly, then faked a polite smile. I pretended not to see anything out of place, just walked past them, nodded at the bartender, and took a seat. Couldn't bring myself to order a drink. My eyes kept drifting to that waist, her waist, and how casually he'd gripped it. She was leaning in to say something to him, the street noise behind them a dull roar, almost as if they were in a world of their own. And me. I was in some backseat corner, fully aware that everything I had believed up to that point might have been a lie. But I didn't confront them. I had no words to shape into a question, let alone an accusation. Instead, I got up after a few silent minutes and walked out. There was no cinematic explosion of anger, no dramatic slamming of fists, just the slow burn of realization that she might not be mine, that I might never have had her, not the way I thought. I guess you could call me Tom. That's the name I answer to on conference calls, the name my coworkers greet when I step into the office. I've never been one to wax poetic about how I feel. Feelings are complicated. Actions are what matter. And I took action, quietly, methodically, after that night. First step, I rummaged through old phone bills, old backup drives, emails. If there was one advantage to working in corporate risk management, it was this. I understood how data flow worked, how to trace it back to the source. And once I found out that her old WhatsApp messages might still linger in a cloud folder, I spent hours restoring them onto an external drive. I won't say I felt anything in particular that night, stooped over my laptop in the dark. Emotions come later, after the facts. And the facts were all there. Her name is Rebecca. We've been married for 6 years. We had a child. Well, I thought we did. A beautiful boy, just turned 2. I used to walk the perimeter of the nursery, watch him sleep, wonder if he'd inherit my father's nose or my mother's stubborn streak. Funny how illusions can shatter in an instant. When I opened that folder, I saw the half-deleted messages. Strings of conversation that read like a confession scrawled across a cheap motel's bathroom mirror. She wrote to him about my work trips, about how lonely she felt, about how he was the only real thing in her life. She told him she loved his voice notes, how they soothed her at night when I was gone. She told him my job bored me to death, that I was distant, that she wanted more adventure, more authenticity. He wrote back with jokes, voice recordings, pictures, some so explicit I closed the laptop, inhaled, and refused to let my thoughts form. But nothing left me as hollow as the audio file I stumbled on next. The slow cadence of her whisper, calling him Danny, telling him she was pregnant, telling him it was his. My hands went numb on the keyboard. In the darkness, the screen's glow highlighted every piece of evidence, every shred of the life I hadn't known. I didn't speak to her about it, didn't rage, didn't weep. I simply took screenshots of everything, saved them offline, and contacted a private testing clinic. I told them I wanted a paternity test. At first, they needed a sample from the child, so I borrowed a used pacifier and delivered it myself, telling Becky I needed to run an errand. She never asked questions, or if she did, she never got answers. The days dragged on like an offbeat metronome. I watched her living life as if nothing had changed. She cooed at the baby, my alleged son, fixed breakfast, while scrolling through her phone, occasionally pausing with a private smile that felt like a gun pointed at my chest. She carried on with her freelance gigs, posted cheerful updates about life in Austin, spouted motivational quotes about being true to yourself. Meanwhile, I attended my corporate meetings, drafted risk assessments, and marked down dates on a calendar with a quiet precision that would chill most men. I scanned her movements for signs she might see Danny. A coffee shop run here, an odd lunch break there, but she was cautious, or maybe just bored of being discreet. One afternoon, I trailed her. She drove downtown, parked near a nondescript building with loft apartments overhead. I watched her step inside, adjusting her hair in the reflection of a glass door. I glanced at my watch. 1 hour, 2 hours. I told myself not to do something stupid, not to barge in and humiliate myself. Finally, I saw her emerge with him. This sandy-haired, blue-eyed dreamer with a camera slung around his neck. They laughed together. And then, there it was again, his hand on her waist. She leaned closer, whispered something that made him grin. My stomach turned to summit. When the test results arrived, they confirmed what the voice note had already spelled out. I am not the father. I sank into my desk chair, the letter in one hand, an old photograph of me and Becky in the other. We'd taken that photo near the People's Sculpture in the center of town. She was smiling so wide, arms thrown around my neck, promising me a future that apparently never existed. You'd think at a moment like this, a man would break something, cry, or pick up a bottle. I just sat there, reading the lines, 0% probability of paternity. So clinical, so final. My next step was to text my friend from the law firm days, Jeff. Ask him if he knew a good custody lawyer, or at least someone who could advise me on what to do about a child who isn't mine. He told me he had a colleague that specialized in family law. We arranged a call. Before I dialed, I looked at the baby's crib in the corner of my home office. Becky had insisted the child sleep in our bedroom for convenience, but I'd set up a small crib in my workspace for daytime naps. The gentle pastel blanket was still there, the small stuffed dinosaur I'd bought at a discount store, memories I'd built on a fraud. I made the call. The lawyer said, Tom, you have to decide if you're going to claim parentage or disestablish it. Texas law can be complicated. I just mumbled, I'll let you know. All right, she said, voice brisk. But don't wait too long. Timing matters. Days bowled into nights. Becky and I barely spoke, and yet it was as if we were locked in some silent waltz. She tried to keep up appearances, half asking about my day or offering to do a grocery run. I'd nod, grunt something about a meeting. We circled each other, both aware that the floor might collapse any second. It was the phone, of course, that gave her away. She'd stare at it like it held a secret code, thumbs suspended over the screen for a fraction too long, or maybe she'd turn away when I entered the room. One evening, I found her hunched over in the laundry room, whispering, Yes, I miss you too. She turned at the faint sound of my footsteps. Our eyes locked. She covered the phone's mic. I'm talking to my mother, she lied. I said nothing, just turned and left. Eventually, I decided I couldn't live in limbo. The DNA report sat in my briefcase, the incriminating messages on a flash drive in my pocket. I needed a plan, needed the final piece of the puzzle. A chain of evidence so airtight that if she tried to spin some story against me in court, I'd be the one calling the shots. I rummaged through her laptop when she went out, recovered more of the chat logs, saved them to multiple backups. I'm not a man who yells. She probably banked on that. Maybe she thought I'd never muster the nerve to confront her. I prefer to act when I'm sure. So I weighed every possibility. A quiet divorce, or some decisive confrontation that left no illusions. One late night, I sat in our living room with the lights off, thinking. The child was sleeping in the bedroom. Becky was locked in the bathroom, giggling into her phone. My mind was already halfway to the endgame. I cornered her a week later. Waited until Danny was out of state. He'd posted on his social feed about traveling to shoot some authentic new footage. I had the evidence spread out on the dining table when Becky walked in from an evening yoga class. She froze. I noticed she set her gym bag carefully on the floor, as if bracing for an earthquake. On the table, the phone backups, the printouts of their messages, the voice transcripts, and most painful of all, the paternity test results. She didn't cry. She just stood there, eyes flicking over each item, like she was reading a script from a foreign language. Finally, she spoke, voice taut. I never meant for it to happen this way. I stared at her, silent. I couldn't have spoken if I tried. My heart was pounding, but you wouldn't know it from my face. She said nothing more. That was it. The sum of her explanation. She never meant to. The street outside was noisy. Sirens, cars honking at the intersection. Yet in that dining room, everything was still. I took off my wedding ring, slid it across the table. She looked down at it, then at me. "Don't," she whispered. It wasn't a plea, more like a reflex. I picked up the ring again, gripped it in my palm until it left a groove. She swallowed, blinked rapidly, but she didn't reach for me. I stood up, placed the ring in my pocket, and walked away. The child was in the nursery, not making a sound. I left the house that evening, drove around aimlessly until I found myself parked at the same bar where I'd first seen Danny's hand on her waist. I sat in the car, stared at the neon sign flickering above the entrance, and thought about going in for a drink. Instead, I reached for my phone, scrolled through pictures of the boy who carried my last name but not my blood. There was a photo of me holding him up to the sunlight, both of us smiling. Anger rattled inside me, but it felt oddly hollow, like a gun with no bullets left. Finally, I started the engine, heading nowhere in particular. Let the road unwind beneath the tires, the city lights washing across the windshield. My mind drifted to the statue downtown, the papal sculpture, a local landmark where Becky and I had our first date. She used to joke that it looked like a giant hand reaching for the sky. I remembered how we laughed, how we dreamed out loud about a future that now felt like a cruel joke. In the days that followed, Becky moved around the house like a shadow, quietly packing small things into boxes. She never told me if she planned to leave, or if she expected me to. We coexisted in a space drained of warmth, speaking only when necessary. I kept an eye on the child, made sure he was safe, even though he wasn't mine. Strange how paternal instinct can linger even when reality slaps you in the face. One afternoon, I caught Becky glancing at me from across the living room. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying. But she wouldn't meet my gaze for long. She turned away, busied herself with her phone. She was probably texting Danny. I could imagine the conversation. "He knows. It's over. I'm scared." Or maybe she wrote something else entirely. I never read those messages. I had all the evidence I needed. I didn't want more. The question now was how to finalize this. The lawyer had told me I could file for divorce and disclaim paternity, or I could pretend, accept the boy as my own. But the second option felt like burying my head in the sand. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Her husband, an unwitting father, or just a man too numb to face the next step. Eventually, I decided the only closure I could get was by handing her the finalized divorce paperwork. No more illusions. I'd put everything in order. She would keep the house for a while. I'd move out. The child, her child, would stay with her. The entire arrangement might have made me look like the villain if people didn't know the truth, but I didn't care about appearances. I cared about severing the ties that strangled me. I waited for her in the living room. She arrived home late, hair still damp from a shower at the gym, or maybe from Danny's apartment. I slid the papers across the table. She took them, read them without expression. I noted the faint trembling of her lips, but she didn't speak. "Sign them," I said quietly. She pressed her pen to the page. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she scrawled her signature in a slow, deliberate motion. She closed her eyes, exhaled. And that was it. It would have been so easy to leave then and there. But I had something else in mind, a final punctuation to our story. I remembered how she and I had discovered the Pipple sculpture years back, how it became our spot. Now, I needed to put that memory to rest. I picked up the ring from my pocket, turned it over in my hand. The streetlights outside cast flickers of yellow across the walls. "I'll be back," I muttered, not sure if she was listening. I heard no response. I took one last look at the quiet baby in his crib, my mind swirling with. The ring looked small and sad in the metal palm, an afterthought left behind. I heard a faint shuffle behind me, saw an older man sipping coffee from a to-go cup. He watched me for a moment, but said nothing. Maybe he understood that we all have ghosts to bury. Maybe he was just curious. Didn't matter. I turned on my heel, walked away, letting the ring stay where it belonged, in the open hand, under the flickering street lamp. I drove back home, though home felt like the wrong word. Becky was waiting in the living room, the baby asleep in the next room. Her arms were crossed, and for the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely shaken. She spoke first. "Tom, do you hate me?" I looked at her, but my stare was blank. Maybe I wanted to hate her. Maybe I was too drained for that. "I don't have the energy to hate," I answered eventually. She parted her lips, but no words came. I could sense the tension in her posture, as if she was caught between regret and defiance. She turned her head toward the bedroom where the baby slept, then back at me. "Are you going to?" She started, then trailed off. "Leave," I said. "Yes, but the baby." I let out a slow breath. "He's yours. And Danny's, right? I'm not going to fight for a child that doesn't belong to me." Her expression twisted, pain, anger, or maybe a flicker of shame. "He loves you, you know. He recognizes your face. I'm not sure it matters anymore." She took a step forward, then stopped, as if crossing an invisible line. "I never wanted to hurt you," she repeated, voice nearly breaking. I was lost, or bored, or... "I don't want your reasons," I cut in. "We're done." Silence. A car horn blared outside. She kept blinking rapidly, as though expecting me to say something that would erase the last few weeks. But there was nothing left to say. I brushed past her, walked to the bedroom we once shared. I grabbed a duffel bag I'd already packed, just the essentials. Her eyes followed me, but she didn't stop me. The echo of my footsteps trailed me down the hallway and out the front door. I left her standing there, in that empty living room. I'm not sure how I expected to feel. Maybe liberated, maybe devastated. But mostly, I felt a kind of numb clarity, as though a thick layer of ice coated every nerve ending. I drove to a motel near the interstate, paid for a room in cash, and tossed my bag on the bed. I sat in the chair by the window, looking out at the long stretch of highway. Trucks barreled past, headlights momentarily slicing through the darkness. I realized that my life had pivoted in the course of one night. No, over the course of many nights that I hadn't noticed. I flicked on the TV. The images flashed across the screen, random commercials for car insurance and pharmaceuticals. I turned the volume down, letting the murmur fill the silence. A memory intruded, me teaching the boy, my supposed son, to say his first words. He'd been babbling sounds that Becky insisted were mama and dada. Now I knew. It meant nothing. Or maybe it meant everything, because he was innocent in all this. But I shook the thought away. I told myself we are defined by actions, not illusions. My action would be to keep walking forward, never looking back. I guess that's the official end, right? The final chapter of a marriage undone by betrayal. But it didn't feel final. Not yet. There was a piece of me that wanted to see Danny face to face, to see the man who had so casually stolen my place. But when I scrolled his social feed, I saw him posting from another city, waxing poetic about living your truth. A blogger with a big grin, thousands of followers cheering him on with likes and emojis. Let them. Let him have the spotlight. I had no interest in giving him more attention. Over the next few days, I met with the lawyer in person, We discussed the divorce terms. She told me about disclaiming paternity, about how I'd waive rights and responsibilities. I nodded, read through the legalese, signed where I needed to. Then I closed the folder, looked at my reflection in the shiny table surface. I almost didn't recognize the man staring back, a guy who used to plan for future birthdays, father-son camping trips, maybe a little house in a quiet suburb. That man was gone. I found a small furnished apartment on the edge of town, clean, anonymous, with no memory of Becky or the baby. I started fresh. The first few nights, I lay awake, staring at the popcorn ceiling. The reality settled in like a slow poison. But each morning, I forced myself to get up, go to work, keep my head down. My colleagues noticed I was quieter than usual, but nobody pried. If they saw the faint lines under my eyes or the tension in my jaw, they politely looked away. One afternoon, I decided to drive past the old house. Call it morbid curiosity. I parked across the street, watched the front door. After a few minutes, Becky stepped out with the baby in her arms, rummaging in her purse for the car keys. She looked tired, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. I noticed she had on the same leggings she used to wear when we'd watch TV together. A pang of something flickered in my chest, but I crushed it down. Then Danny appeared beside her. He was carrying a camera, fiddling with the lens. They exchanged a few words, though I couldn't hear. He leaned over, placed a soft kiss on the baby's forehead. Becky smiled. Brief, not the radiant grin I remembered, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. They looked like a family. My presence was no longer required. I kept telling myself I felt nothing. But my hands were clenched around the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. I almost put the car in drive and sped away. Instead, I turned off the ignition, slumped back in the seat. Let them leave first. They got into Becky's sit-in, with Danny sliding into the passenger seat. Then they drove off, disappearing around the bend. I waited a moment, then turned the key and left too. In the weeks that followed, I tried to reclaim some sense of normalcy. I renewed old friendships, even had a beer or two with colleagues after work. People asked, "How's Rebecca? How's the kid?" I answered with half-truths or changed the subject. Eventually, folks got the hint not to pry. One day, I got a text from Becky. "We need to talk about your name on the birth certificate." I stared at that message for a long time. My name was legally listed as the father. I typed back, "Not interested. Handle it with your lawyer." Then I put my phone away, ignoring the subsequent calls. I wasn't about to have a heart-to-heart with her about a child who never was mine to begin with. Still, a part of me wondered about the little boy who once recognized my face. I'd grown used to hearing him babble in the mornings, used to the weight of him in my arms. Now I had to pretend he didn't exist. Maybe that was for the best. Emotions through silence, right? Time moved on, and I found a strange peace in routine. I'd get up at 6, go for a run, grab coffee, head to the office. In the evenings, I read news articles, listened to the faint hum of traffic outside my apartment windows. My boss, noticing the extra hours I put in, offered me a promotion. More responsibilities, more pay. I accepted, hoping to fill the void with work. I thought about how people say heartbreak can destroy you. Maybe it does, but sometimes destruction clears the ground for something new. I was free now, freed from illusions, from the chain that once linked me to Becky's version of reality. Maybe that's a good thing, even if it came at a brutal cost. One evening, I was packing up at the office when I got a call from an unknown number. I usually ignore those, but something compelled me to answer. "Tom." It was Danny's voice. I recognized that smooth tone from the voice notes I'd heard. My grip on the phone tightened. "What do you want?" He hesitated. "Look, man, I realize how messed up this is, me calling you. But Becky, she's upset. She feels like everything's out of control. She wants to talk, but you won't answer." I let out a slow breath. My gaze drifted to the window. where the city lights blurred against the glass. We have nothing to talk about. She wants you to at least see the baby. You know, to say goodbye, properly. My jaw clenched. He's not mine. A pause. Then Danny exhaled heavily. I know, but I guess she just wants closure. She says the baby misses you. He cries when someone else picks him up from the crib at night. I'm not trying to rub anything in your face, man. I just... Don't call me again, I muttered. Then I hung up. My blood felt like it was boiling, but there was no satisfaction in telling him off. Just a numb emptiness. I turned out the lights, locked my office, and drove home in silence. As the divorce proceedings finalized, Becky texted me a few more times about logistics, the distribution of our belongings, the deed to the house, the removal of my name from the birth certificate. I responded with curt, businesslike messages. The day the judge signed off on everything, I slipped the court documents into a folder and left them in a drawer. I still remember that date, how the sky was a pale, cloudless blue, how the breeze barely stirred the trees. My coworker Jeff clapped me on the back, said, "Let's celebrate you being a free man." I shook my head, forced a half smile, said, "Maybe next time." Then I went to the men's room and stared at my reflection in the mirror, searching for the man I used to be. Couldn't find him. At some point, word must have gotten around that Becky had moved on. We had mutual acquaintances, after all. Neighbors, gym buddies, ex-colleagues. A friend told me Becky was posting pictures of herself with Danny and the baby on social media, extolling the virtues of new beginnings. I nodded, feigning indifference. I didn't bother to look at those posts. They didn't concern me. The place that used to be our home was now presumably a staging ground for their life. At odd moments, I recalled the ring I'd left at the sculpture. I wondered if it was still there, or if some city worker had tossed it, or maybe a homeless person had sold it for quick cash. The thought didn't upset me. On the contrary, I liked the idea that the ring no longer weighed me down. I'd be lying if I said I never felt pangs of anger or regret. Some nights, I woke up sweating, heart pounding, images of Becky with Danny swirling in my head. But then the alarm would ring, and I'd push myself out of bed, ignoring that flicker of bitterness. Because at the end of the day, what choice did I have? Eventually, I started boxing up old memorabilia from our marriage. Photos, trinkets, postcards from vacations. I couldn't bring myself to toss them in the trash, so I stuffed them in a storage locker. Maybe one day, I'd open that box again and feel something other than betrayal. Maybe not. For now, I needed them out of sight. Weeks turned into months. I immersed myself in work, forging new relationships with clients. Sometimes I met up with Jeff, who would crack jokes about the freed bachelor life. I wasn't in the mood for dating or flirting, but he insisted I'd move on eventually. I shrugged it off, let him believe whatever he wanted. Then one crisp morning, I found myself driving downtown without any particular reason. Traffic was light, the sky bright. Before I knew it, I was walking toward the papal sculpture again. Maybe I just needed to see it to confirm that the ring was gone, that the final symbol of my marriage had vanished. I approached the statue, scanning the metal hand. No ring, just a faint discoloration on the palm. I rested my hand against the cool surface, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The city noise was loud, delivery trucks, pedestrians chatting. But inside, I felt a peculiar silence, a vacuum. Like the storm had passed, and I was standing in its wreckage, still alive. I felt no impulse to retrieve anything, no pang of sorrow. Instead, I found myself smirking, the weight of 1,000 regrets peeling off like old paint. I might have been destroyed, but maybe that's what made me stronger. I left the sculpture behind, strolling through the bustling downtown. People rushed by, each consumed with their own lives. I was one of them now, just another face in the crowd, unattached, forging a path without illusions. And it felt oddly good. As I walked, I noticed a street performer strumming a guitar, a half-empty tip jar at his feet. The tune he played was slow, soulful, but with a steady undercurrent that hinted at resilience. I paused to listen, letting the chords seep into my bones. For a moment, I closed my eyes. No more resentment, no more frantic searching for answers. Just me, the music, and a world that continued spinning regardless of my personal disasters. When I finally moved on, I dropped a few bills into the tip jar. The musician nodded in thanks, never stopping his strumming. I thought about how, if you look closely, life is full of these small gestures, moments that remind you that you can begin again. That night, I went home to my apartment, whipped up a simple dinner, and sat at the table alone. It wasn't a sad loneliness, just the quiet aftermath of a storm that had uprooted everything. I thought about calling my parents back in Cleveland, letting them know that the divorce was final. But I decided to wait until morning. I'd never been a man of big confessions over the phone. Instead, I opened my laptop, checked my email. Then I pulled up a blank document, typed a few lines about a risk assessment for work. For the first time in a while, I felt the possibility of new horizons. The sense that maybe, just maybe, I could reshape my life with the same methodical approach I'd used to expose her betrayal. Sometimes, I still catch echoes of the past, the faintest whiff of Becky's perfume if a stranger passes by in a grocery aisle, or a memory of how Danny looked with his camera. But these thoughts come and go like distant thunder. The storm's over, and I survived. There's a certain power in that realization. I was destroyed, yes, but I built myself back up, piece by piece, without raising my voice, without turning my heartbreak into a spectacle. Some might say I should have fought for her, or for the child, or at least for an explanation that might soothe my pride. But that's not who I am. My version of closure was acknowledging that the life I had was a lie, and then walking away from it. The last time I saw Becky, it was in a grocery store aisle, months after the divorce. She was alone, scanning the shelves for baby formula or cereal. She caught sight of me, gave a half wave, uncertain. I nodded in return, said nothing. She seemed thinner, more fragile. I walked past without stopping. I could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken what-ifs. But I had no words for her, no longing to fix what couldn't be fixed. I left my cart at the end of the aisle, hurried to the exit, and stepped into the warm Texas sunlight. Exhaled. The street noise was deafening. Horns, engines, people yelling. But inside me, there was a clarity that no one could penetrate. She had her new life. So did I sometimes, near the edge of sleep. I think about that big open palm of the papal sculpture, how I left the ring behind for all the world to see. Let the curious wonder about the story behind it. Let them imagine heartbreak, betrayal, or maybe some whimsical romantic gesture. Only I know the truth, and the truth sets you free. So they say. In the end, it's just a ring. Just a piece of metal that once symbolized a promise broken by two people who drifted apart. He can have her. She can have him. The child can grow up in their arms, a puzzle piece that never fit into my life the way I thought. I'll walk forward, focusing on what I can control. I'm not naive enough to believe that I'm fully healed, or that none of this has left scars. But scars are proof you've been tested, that you've made it through the flames. They remind you not to repeat old mistakes, and maybe down the line, I'll meet someone else, or maybe I'll stay alone. Doesn't matter. I have my job, my sense of self. That's enough for now. At the end of the day, I'm alive. I've weathered a storm that could have destroyed me. In a way, it did. But I came out the other side, breathing, standing tall. That's all the victory I need. So if someone asked, how did it feel? The betrayal, the lies. I'd say it felt like war. A war fought in silence, behind closed doors. But I won, not by screaming or swinging fists, but by walking away and refusing to carry the ruins any longer. And that final act, leaving the ring in the statue's outstretched palm, like an offering to whatever gods rule over heartbreak, was the punctuation mark at the end of our story. Let her followers wonder why. Let them guess. It's none of their business. And for me, it's done. All that's left now is tomorrow, and I'll face it on my own terms.